public-private partnership between the Kansas City Public Library and the Downtown Council, and then later the Greater Kansas City Community Foundation. The project represents an unprecedented effort to develop new partnerships, generate community support, and create a wonderfully unique resource for the citizens of our region. While libraries are much more than just the buildings they dwell in, as a Kansas Citian and as a downtown advocate, I would be remiss if I did not tell you about the project and the wonderful architectural features of our new home across the street. Many people believe that the classic marble and bronze building, formerly the First National Bank, looks like a library should look. Towering columns, marble, grand bronze doors, elaborate ceilings. This will truly be a new cultural addition for the entire city and particularly downtown. In 2000, our city celebrated its 150th anniversary. As we approach the Kansas City Public Library's 130th anniversary and the grand opening of our new facility 1 year from now in 2003, I'm reminded that the library has a rich history which almost dates back to the beginning of the city. Our new facility across the street carries that tradition in our city's rich architecture and history. I'm pleased to report that the construction team has made great progress over the last few months. Construction on the First National Bank building began on May 1st of this year. The roof was removed within the last week, and preparation for the 4th floor finish and the 5th floor addition to the building is underway. Demolition and remediation of the interior was completed prior to construction, including the removal of minor vaults and interior walls. Structural reinforcements are being made throughout the building to assure the floor loading capability required to house the library's collections of books and materials. Evidently, books are much heavier than money. Openings in the floor have been cut for the new grand public staircase and 4th floor to view to the skylight, and those to view to the skylight. Fortunately, and those of us who have ever tried renovating an older home know that this is very significant. We've encountered no significant difficulties during the construction process. We are committed to bringing the project in on time and within the allocated budget. To do that, we are going to have to defer some portions of the project, but that's to be expected in these tough economic times. We are confident, however, that the most significant of these deferrals will be restored to the project in the near future, and they will not affect our ability to serve the community and fulfill our mission. This evening, I'm very pleased to announce that the Campaign Leadership Committee has secured almost $18 million towards our $23.5 million private fundraising goal. The success experienced to date, despite a difficult economy and other local campaigns, is the result of the hard work of many community volunteers who are committed to this project. I would like to take this opportunity to recognize a few folks who have really made this project a reality. First and foremost, our Campaign Leadership Committee. Olivia Dorsey, Jonathan Kemper, Phil Kirk, and John Laney. These are the people who are really making this project possible. And let's give them a hand. We started off with 3 great lead gifts for the project. The William T. Kemper Foundation, the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation, and the Hall Family Foundation were the first to step up to the plate. Mayor Barnes was here earlier this evening, and the city's support for this project, and we hope the city's continued support in other ways as the project goes forward, are critical. Several foundations have shown their support in the major donor category. The Francis Family Foundation, Gary Dickinson Family Charitable Foundation, Greater Kansas City Community Foundation, Kirk Foundation, American Century Companies Foundation, Miller Nichols Charitable Foundation, Morgan Family Foundation, Muriel McBrien Kaufman Foundation, Soslin Foundation, and the H&R Block Foundations. Corporations have also been extremely generous. DST Systems, Stillwell Financial, Financial Holding Corporation, and J.E. Dunn Construction Company. And we have many of our friends listed there and among the steering committee members who are here with us this evening. Ann Dickinson, Steve Dunn, Spence Heddens, Jan Kramer, Bill Lyons, Tom McDonald, Jeanette Nichols, Ramon McGeera, sorry Ramon, who are all in the room. Also on the committee, Reverend Cleaver, Bill Dunn, Scott Francis, Bill Hall, Irv Hockaday, Crosby Kemper III, Mike Kirk, Herb Kahn, Bill Lucas, Bill Nelson, Gertrude Field Oliver, David Ross, and Clyde Wendell, and Buzz Willard did sneak in this evening. I know I saw him here. So. Friends of the Library, our grassroots library organization, stepped up to the plate with a $100,000 contribution, and we're very happy to have representing the Friends of the Library here this evening, Susan Bailey, Jane Jacobs, and Ramona Witt. And finally, many of the contributors are also with us: Joan Caulfield and Alan Warren, Thornton and Ann Cook, Fred and Jane Havens, Shirley and Barnett Hellsberg, Dave and Connie Mehta, and Beth Smith. Also, I am honored to make a special announcement on behalf of the Greater Kansas City Foundation that a major gift in the amount of $170,000 has been pledged to the project by Christine Golder in honor of her mother, Genevieve Gouldner. Genevieve Gouldner was a longtime resident of Kansas City and an avid user of our libraries. The memorial gift will be recognized in the building through the naming of the gallery and exhibit space on the mezzanine level overlooking the grand lobby. I am pleased to introduce Mr. Jack Thurman, who is here representing the Gouldner family tonight. Jack? Thank you. Thank you, Jack, for attending, and please send our warmest thanks to Mrs. Christine Gouldner for her support of the project. Our thanks to the Community Foundation as well for facilitating this contribution. Additional information about the project, including photographs of the unique features of the building, is included in a packet which you will receive after the program. And now, after telling you a few of the great things that are going to be in our new library, I should tell you one thing that won't be there. It won't have me. As many of you may have heard, after the first of the year, I'm retiring after 19 years at the helm of the Kansas City Public Library. It has been an absolutely great ride. We've accomplished some terrific things thanks to you and others in the community. Now it's time for me to step aside and allow a new director some time to put his or her fingerprints on this wonderful project and make it a stunning success that it deserves to be, thanks to all of you. So again, thank you for being with us this evening. I'll be available to answer questions following the program. And with that, I conclude by thanking each of you for your ongoing support of the Kansas City Public Library. Now please enjoy your dinner.
Just a housekeeping item. You should have gotten a couple of materials passed out somewhere between the steak and the salmon. and those will give you kind of a number of people at our table had a question about basic information about the library and who we are and what the campaign's about. And so that's included in that very colorful brochure there, which shows the facade of the bank. And then I added to that something which I thought was a remarkable document, which is the thank you letter that Vartan and the president of the board of the New York Public Library wrote at the conclusion of their campaign, talking about what they did with the money. Vartan may have some remarks about that, but I thought the letter talking about what the state of the library was when Vartan took over and what they left it with, and the people who were involved and what it meant to New York were actually inspirational. So I had our print shop make up copies for you, and I hope you read it because it's a wonderful document. Cover of the library, that learning, books, education have glamour, that self-improvement has glamour, that hope has glamour. Reading Vartan Gregorian's resume is truly awesome. He has excelled at many careers, all of them challenging. Author, academic, provost, library director, university president, and now president of the Carnegie Corporation. He is both an intellect of the first rank and truly a leader in the modern world of thought and ideas. I have no doubt myself that the New York Public Library owes its continued preeminence and effectiveness to Vartan's legacy of intelligence, vision, and energy, and to a personal touch which is at once both charming and compelling. It is our honor and privilege that Dr. Gregorian is here with us this evening, and for this we should thank especially Dan Kramer and the Greater Kansas City Community Foundation and Jake Mascott, whom so many of us in this room know personally, who worked with Vartan as both a board member of the New York Public Library and as a key fundraiser. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to give you Dr. Vartan Gregorian.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm very disappointed how short my introduction was. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. As people who appreciate writers, books, and libraries, you may have heard the story about Charles Dickens's fake books. But please indulge me for a moment to retell that story. In 1851, Dickens moved into Tavistock House, the home of his dreams in Dublin. To ensure the privacy of his study, he had the doorway camouflaged with shelves of dummy books, so that it disappeared into the adjacent library's wall of bookshelves. Poking fun at libraries, and for that matter humanity, Dickens gave his fake books some wry titles. One was called Cats' Lives, in 9 volumes, of course. Another was called The History of Short Chancery Suit, sprawling over 21 volumes. Another set of books, The Wisdom of Our Ancestors, included titles such as Ignorance, Superstition, Dirt, Disease, The Block, and The Stake. The Virtues of Our Ancestors, however, was so slender that the title was printed sideways on the spine. Then there was a 3-volume magnus opus entitled 5 Minutes in China. Tonight, I am deeply honored to be here in Kansas City to talk about real books and the importance of public libraries. I also want to pay tribute to you for building a magnificent new building, main library. I understand that once you finish restoring this edifice in the Greco-Roman style, it will virtually be a temple to honor knowledge, doubling the number of library holdings accessible to the public, providing space for exhibitions, recitals, lectures, and, as if all that were not sufficiently stimulating, a place for a cafe on the mezzanine floor. With many others here tonight, I too believe the new library will grace the city, help stimulate a downtown renaissance, and most importantly, be better able to play its central role in the cultural, intellectual, and democratic life of the entire metropolitan community. To the extent that citizens see that statement as novel for the far-fetched, as far as far-fetched the citizens see it, from my experience, a rough gauge of the challenge you face in transforming public appreciation into active political support, the kind of support needed for the library to become a regional project, steaming with civic pride and fueling the engine of urban and metropolitan renewal. That Kansas City faces a major challenge is suggested by the recent report on the region by the urban affairs specialist Curtis Johnson and Neil Pierce. These authors, distinguished ones, mentioned the library, which serves more than 2 million citizens a year, only in passing. The well-intended authors did not even include the library in the map of the area's assets. To be sure, the map's purpose is to highlight the distance and disconnection between major resources. But looked at another way, the map serves as a graphic display of the need for the library to become, in effect, the mind of this urban body that sprawls mindlessly, quote unquote, across state borders and a dozen country lines. The Kansas City Library, after all, is the most natural, capable, and democratic institution for centering and connecting these diverse communities through the free and open provision of information, entertainment, culture, knowledge, above all else, learning. Kansas City is joining other cities in rediscovering the importance of libraries as the community's institutional minds and hearts. New main libraries have recently been built or renovated in San Antonio, Texas, Phoenix, Arizona, Denver, Colorado, San Francisco, California, Sacramento, California, Portland, Oregon. The Chicago Public Library is completing one of the world's largest public library capital improvement programs, which includes 13 new construction projects and the renovation and replacement of most of its branch libraries. I have to tell you here that your invitation of mine to come here is very good judgment. Because every place I have gone, all the cities I mentioned, most of them, to dedicate their libraries, they have succeeded in their campaigns. So you should know that. Overall, last year, 80 more libraries were built and 132 were renovated, bringing the nation's investment in library improvements close to $4 billion since mid-1990s, according to the American Library Association. The association says we have more than 16,000 free libraries or more sources for books and computers than McDonald's has franchises for Happy Meals. And believe it or not, Americans go to libraries more than twice as often as they go to the movies. In the last year, as the economy slowed, library visits also increased by 8.3%. Yet the cost of using the library works out to only about $23 a year for the average taxpayer. One reason for their popularity is that our libraries are continually expanding and enriching their services. In Kansas City, 4th to 12th grade students can receive help with homework from online tutors. In St. Louis, Missouri, cyber mobiles bring the internet and online reference services into many neighborhoods. In Philadelphia, the free library faxes articles and other information to homes and offices. In Detroit, you can obtain a copy of a patent far more quickly than from the US Patent Office. In San Francisco, the new library provides 400 electronic workstations and has capacity for 700 more. Libraries are leading the effort to close the digital divide, as nearly every public library provides free access to the internet. In fact, libraries are the #1 point of online access for people who lack computers and internet accounts. In the main, libraries have shown remarkable resilience in the face of repeated challenges to their viability and a remarkable ability to transform themselves to meet changing needs. They continue to adapt to one of the most astonishing shifts in technology of communication ever to take place in a rapidly spreading use of network computers, bringing vast amounts of information and misinformation directly to the home, school, and the office. The breathtaking pace of these developments has led some of the proponents of the internet to wonder whether brick and mortar libraries are any longer relevant. Never fear, the libraries have always found a way to fit new media to their fundamental purposes and become indispensable. Not surprisingly, nearly all Americans surveyed by Gallup poll in 1998 said libraries would be needed in the future despite the increased availability of information from the computer. At the same time, we must deal with the reality that libraries are often taken for granted, and their significance as living institutions is sometimes forgotten. This was certainly the case, as unfortunately the document was passed to you, so I have to skip some of my remarks because you'll read what we did, so I have to cut that short. This was certainly the case when in 1970s, late 1970s, actually 1981, when Andrew High School became chairman of the New York Public Library Board of Directors and recruited me to become president in 1981. In describing the challenges the library faced back then, he writes, and I quote in his memoirs, "When I first signed up to help the New York Public Library, it had almost no reputation left to protect. During the 1970s, New York City came so close to bankruptcy that it had to cut back on everything. It cut back savagely of funds for the library because in those days, the library had no political clout. It had no constituency except scholars, children, and ordinary citizens who liked to read. The city cut back so hard on the library that some of the branches were open only 8 hours a week. Some librarians had to scurry from building to building trying to service 3 branches in 1 week. The marble inside the main Fifth Avenue building, the one with the great sculpted lions guarding the broad front steps, was so filthy brown that you would never guess it was a marble. The chandeliers and the lighting fixtures all throughout the main building were dirty and had only 2 or 3 bulbs in each. The beautiful Celeste Bartos Forum that you were mentioning, now the library's most important meeting place, had been turned into a warehouse. The gorgeous Gottesman exhibition hall had been divided by masonite partitions into tiny offices for personnel and accounting. The only decent room in the entire building was the boardroom, but even there, the tall curtains fell apart if you touched them. Inside this building were more than 3 million books, many of them extremely valuable, gathering dust and crumbling away in the stacks that were not air-conditioned. The library had begged for air conditioning for 20 years, but nothing had happened. That is the way it was, underfunded, underappreciated, and with many of its 100 buildings falling apart and inadequately staffed. The library's constituents, as library constituents almost everywhere, were unorganized and not vocal. As a result, politicians took it for granted that the libraries were not priorities and that library budgets could be slashed with impunity. To meet the library's needs, we produced a wish list that amounted to $1 billion. To be realistic, we scaled the list down to 476 and then down to 307 million in order not to have our trustees to faint. When we announced a capital campaign, there were exclamations of disbelief. But 5 years later, the goal was exceeded with public and private funds, not to mention more than $70 million in collections that were given by collectors who were now believed that library would not sell them. We were not in the accession business. We were in collecting business. We're in preservation business. We're in dissemination business. We were able to increase the endowment, almost double the endowment of New York Public Library. The news was that New York Public Library by 1985 would have $50 million deficit a year and would have spent its entire endowment. The fact was, by 1988-89, it had $179, almost $180 million endowment, even though we spent 5 to 6% a year without income. We're able to increase the endowment, collections, hours, and services for both research libraries and the branch libraries. But I was most proud to witness the library's revival as the People's Palace, reaffirming its central place in the city's civic and cultural life. It wasn't easy, of course. Early on, a major challenge was to mobilize all segments of society, support the library's renewal by reminding them that libraries are necessities, not luxuries. As part of the effort to get this message out, we strengthened the library's departments for government relations and public relations. We told our story everywhere, to officials in the city, state, federal governments, as well as to countless organizations, foundations, and individual philanthropists. Instead of asking for small sums, as had been done in the past, in the form of charity, we asked for philanthropy. We asked for investments. We asked for big sums. Noting that other equally deserving cultural institutions had traditionally received much more support than the library. We showed that the library was not an isolated, passive institution, but an active one with a lot of impact. After all, library is not a book warehouse, but an educational institution. And we underscored that role by holding lecture series, exhibitions, and celebrations for writers and cultural figures whose creations, records, and books were in the library. We computerized all the holdings, helping to democratize access to information and knowledge. And we did something else, because many times, many people argue or use money as an excuse in the absence of ideas. Just let me show one thing that I told your colleagues. With $1,000, we started a project. Merchants Bank, $1,000. And that $1,000 bought cookies and punch. But we invited all the valedictorians of City of New York to give them Minerva Prize, because I got tired of saying nothing good happens in public schools. There must be at least 250 good students. So why don't we honor them? We brought them to the library to give them Minerva Prize. And we asked each year a famous person who had been valedictorian in his class, in her class. Barbara Walters, I.M. Pei, Ben Vereen, all kinds of individuals, Mayor Koch, to come and address fellow valedictorians. The result was great. We also invited all the publishers to give these kids reference books, and these kids received 10, 20, 15, whatever they could carry, their parents could carry, reference books. Overnight, it became the place to be for every politician to take pictures with the valedictorians in your public library. So it doesn't take money to accomplish things. That's the only message I want to show. Not that you do it without money, but it doesn't take much money. Whenever we could, we demonstrated that libraries mean education. Libraries mean consolation. Libraries mean culture. And libraries mean jobs. We stress that libraries are not only for the poor, the helpless, and children without books. Rather, we showed that the libraries were for the benefit of the entire society, helping all the educational institutions, all the professions, and all the businesses. We pointed out that the library's vast repository of information and knowledge was constantly being tapped by just about any industry we can think of, including advertising, film and television, fashion industry. Lawyers used patent collections extensively. Reporters used the periodicals department. Airlines used the map department in order to find which island Pan Am can land on its way to trans-Pacific transportation, because they did not have detailed maps. Families look up genealogy records We were gratified that we were successful in building coalitions and making joint public-private partnerships and agreements on how money would be spent. In the mid-1980s, our media campaigns were generating more than 3,000 mentions a year in the national media. We encountered criticism, but that is to be expected. We were, for example, criticized for spending money to clean the main library building, the first building to be cleaned in New York. We felt the money was well spent because we wanted to show off the building, its beauty, to reawaken civic pride in what was built to be magnificent tribute to the people and the city of New York, the state and the nation. We wanted to restore its luster as the people's palace because we believe that democracy and excellence are not mutually exclusive. Just because something is public, it does not have to be dirty, mediocre, and of no use. We're also criticized for opening the library gift shop, for having social events and fundraisers at the public library. But these activities are in line with library's role in the center of the city's cultural life. During, incidentally, when Village Voice, the only one that attacked me for beautifying the library, having bathrooms, have shining gold, what do you call the fixtures. You know who defended me? Howard Fast, communist writer. He wrote to Village Voice. He said, Gregorian is trying his best to rescue the library. Either put up or shut up. You don't have to do anything. Anyway, we're also criticized for opening library, etc. During my years at the library, we honored more than 175 authors, ranging from Renate Edler to Herman Wouk. We celebrated them as literary lions, dinners once a year, catered right in the restored reading rooms of the library. It was not to make money alone. One of the strategies was to make writers, scientists, scholars to see the library as theirs. They were shareholders of the library, and therefore library belonged to them. It was only the library that gave them immortality, and not bookstores, and not necessarily family heirlooms. 21 authors dined with library patrons at 21 tables, for which sponsors had to contribute 10,000. Then we went to 25,000, hoping, but we did not become greedier to go to 50,000. The authors signed and gave away copies of their books, which their publishers donated. After dinner, we often had an actor perform or read a dramatic reading. But everything ended 10 p.m. And New Yorkers love when there are no speeches, everything ends on time, and they can plan ahead. But we did not rely entirely on the society's elite. Every year, for example, we held a 2-day holiday party to welcome citizens to their library, thank them for their support, and encourage their contribution. Tens of thousands of people came with their children, grandchildren, and so forth to visit the library on the holidays, to see mime, to see performances, to be greeted by Mrs. Astor and all the trustees lined up at the door to shake hands of every citizen, to thank them whether they gave $5, no dollars, or $1 million. By supporting the library is a never-ending struggle. So librarians can't be shy about tooting their own horn. This year, New York City is again having major financial problems, and the mayor has proposed 15% reduction in library funding, even as demand for library services has grown. In 2001, library visits had increased by 12%, and book circulation had increased by 20% over the prior year. Arguing against the reduction, in an editorial I myself could not have written any better, the New York Times called for the city to find money to, quote, soften the blow to one of the most vital, well-loved parts of city government. Thanks to greater public awareness and support for the library, the blow was ultimately softened to merely 6%, which is lowest cut in any of the departments in the city. Across America, we're coming to realize the library's unsurpassed importance as a civic institution. The library contains a society's collective but discriminatory memory. It's an act of honor to the past, a witness to the future, hence a visible judgment of both. In our democratic society, the library stands for hope, for learning, for progress, for literacy, for self-improvement, and for civic engagement. The library is a symbol of opportunity, citizenship, equality, freedom of speech, and freedom of thought, and hence it's a symbol for our democracy. It's a critical component in the free exchange of information, which is at the heart of our democracy. In both an actual and symbolic sense, the library is the guardian of freedom of thought and freedom of choice. Hence, it constitutes the best symbol of the First Amendment of our Constitution. We must not forget the library's critical role in dispelling ignorance about our nation's history and the ideals, traditions, and purposes of our democracy. A nation that expects to be ignorant and free, warned Thomas Jefferson, expects what never was and what never will be. The free library is, in the words of Andrew Carnegie, the cradle of democracy. And he backed up that belief by building 1,681 public libraries in nearly as many American communities, another 828 libraries abroad. I should mention that my fellow educators, librarians, information scientists, all communicators of culture and curators and creators of knowledge continue to rock this cradle of democracy even as it moves into cyberspace. Libraries contain, in my opinion, the heritage of humanity, the record of its triumphs and failures, its intellectual, scientific, and artistic achievements, and its collective memory. They are a source of knowledge, scholarship, and wisdom. They're an institution withal where the left and the right, God and the devil, are together classified and retained in order to teach us what to emulate and what not to repeat. Libraries are thus the most tolerant institutions we have. The good and evil are there, and the library makes no value judgment about them. As the poet Richard Armour writes, the writer, libraries are where people lower their voices and raise their minds. By seeing so many examples in libraries, by comparing and knowing about right and wrong, one comes to appreciate shades in history, nuances in history, possibilities and limitations. As a result, one becomes more able to understand other people's positions, knowing how arduously they have come to those positions, even though they may be wrong. Libraries are as old as civilization, the object of pride, envy, and sometimes senseless destruction throughout the ages. As a matter of fact, today was the opening of Library of Alexandria. But they had only 250,000 books, whereas in the past, before it was destroyed, it had the entire humanities knowledge in there. At that time, it was estimated 800,000 volumes. The renowned Library of Alexandria, Egypt, was the first institution based on the premise that all the world's knowledge could be gathered under one roof. It was founded by Ptolemy in 300 BC, who sent agents to all the cities in Asia, North Africa, and Europe to collect copies of all books that existed in the known world. The library and its 700,000 volumes was destroyed in the 7th century AD. But for 9 luminous centuries, Alexandria was a place of inspiration, a symbol of the unity of knowledge and scholarship, and of limitless potential of human advancement. Between the clay tablets of ancient Babylon and the computers of modern library stretch more than 5,000 years of men's and women's insatiable desire to ensure their immortality through the written word or symbol. Instinctively, we want to transmit the fruits of culture and civilization and to share memory, experience, wisdom, fantasy, and longing with the whole of mankind, with future generations as well. The modern library allows one to go 5,000 years into the past to try to cope with the present, and also to imagine, to fantasize about the future. It gives you a sense of the cosmic relations to the totality of humanity, but at the same time, a sense of isolation. Here is the human endeavor, human aspiration, human agony, human ecstasy, human bravura, human failures, all before you. Humanity has gone through dreadful horrors, dreadful turmoil, varied glories. How do we distill the past? How do we retain the memories? Through the libraries. One gets thrilled and frightened at the same time in the presence of a library. During the past 20 years, with the advent of the computer age, we have been undergoing another historical revolutionary shift equal to that previous revolutionary changes. The importance of the computer, its gain, its portability, capability, ease, orderliness, accuracy, reliability, and information storage capacity. The new information technologies are the driving force behind the explosion of information and the fragmentation of knowledge that we witness today. We are told that all available information doubles every 3 years, 2 years, yet we are able only to use less than 5% of the available information. The information technologies have shrunk the traditional barriers of time and space, giving us the ability to record, organize, and quickly communicate vast amounts of information. Today, the entire corpus of Greek and Latin literature can fit on one CD-ROM and be carried inconspicuously in a jacket pocket. We face for the first time in history of mankind the ability of providing each and every individual, all of you here, his or her own Library of Alexandria. The greatest challenge facing us today is how to organize information in structured knowledge. We must rise above the obsession with quantity of information and the speed of transmission. We must focus on the fact that the key issue for us is our ability to organize that information once it has been amassed, to assimilate it, to find meaning in it, and to assure its survival. And that cannot be done without libraries and without librarians. Good librarians, I should say. In the decade ahead, our democracy and our society will be facing a major challenge. Many in our society will have access to information and knowledge, and hence access to power, the power of autonomy, power of enlightenment, power of self-improvement, and self-assertion, and power over their lives and their families' futures. And there will be others who will have no access to information, hence no access to power, no access to autonomy. The new class division, cleavage, is going to be those who have access to information and power and those who don't. Such a cleavage will have tremendous consequences on the future of our nation. Our nation cannot afford to have 1/5 of its population being illiterate. For reading is a means to education. Education is a means to knowledge, and knowledge is a means to power and bright future. Those who learn to read and write do so not only for themselves and their families, but they do so for our nation as well. They learn in order to become good citizens and good ancestors. That is why reading and the love of libraries and books has to begin in the early stages of education. School libraries constitute an indispensable introduction to literacy and learning about the world and the universe. They are pathways of self-discovery. They are tools for progress and autonomy. Even in this age of computer and information revolution, microchips, lasers, fiber optics, and other technological elaborations, the raw input is still human speech, human idiosyncrasy, and literacy. Libraries are still indispensable tools. They provide pleasure, discretion, silence, creative solitude, and privacy. Reading universalizes us, especially now when the computer has brought us to the depth of distance. The library then is the university of universities, the symbol of our universal community, of the unity of knowledge, of the commonwealth of learning. It's only true and free university there is. In this university, there are no entrance examinations, no subsequent examinations, no diplomas, no graduation, because nobody can graduate from a library. Ralph Waldo Emerson had it right when he called the library as the people's university. By the same token, no university in the world has ever risen to greatness without having a great library. And no university even is greater than its library. And no city is greater than its library. That is because I believe libraries represent and embody the spirit of humanity, a spirit that has been extolled throughout history by countless writers, artists, scholars, philosophers, theologians, scientists, teachers, and ordinary men and women in myriad of tongues and dialects. Above all else, the library constitutes an act of faith in the continuity of life. The library is not, therefore, an ossified institution or historical relic. Together with the museum, the library is the DNA of our culture. Libraries are the mirror held up to the face of humankind, the diary and the textbook of the human race. The existence and the welfare of the library are of paramount importance in the life of a society, in the life of a community, the life of a university, the life of a school and a college, and the life of a city, and therefore the life of a nation. But libraries are more than repositories of past human endeavor. They're instruments of civilization. They're a laboratory of human aspiration, a window to the future, and a wellspring for action. They are sources of intellectual growth and hope. In this land and everywhere on earth, they are a medium of progress, autonomy, empowerment, independence, and self-determination. They have always provided, and I would suggest always will provide, a place and space for imaginative recreation, imaginative rebirth, and imaginative isolation or solitude. That's because library is a transcendent institution, being able to surpass the limitations of time and space. The library is an oasis, a place for reflection, for contemplation, for privacy, for the renewal of one's imagination and development of one's mind. Libraries are vehicles of self-renewal. In his book, Love in the Time of Cholera, Gabriel Garcia Marquez speaks of the conviction that human beings are not born once and for all on the day their mothers give birth to them, but that life obliges them to give birth to themselves over and over again. This is also true of the libraries. They have to renew themselves because information is constantly changing, and knowledge is constantly being renewed. And the same could be said about cities. They're not created once and for all time. They must recreate themselves, survive, thrive, and give rebirth to themselves. I would like to close by congratulating you once more for your support and your work on behalf of the library, the downtown, and the region, for your faith in Kansas, your own wonderful city, for the rebirth of the library in this refurbished Greco-Roman temple is an extremely good news and good omen for Americans, but especially your own citizens. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to pay tribute to you and to the libraries. Thank you very much.
We set aside a few minutes if anyone would like to ask Vartan for any questions about his work or interests or his further on his views, which I can only concur with. I do want to apologize for the shortness of my introduction, by the way. Next time you're in town,
I was joking.
I will get it right. Vartan, if there are questions, would you please honor us by replying? Are there questions of this audience?
Yes?
What's your last book you checked out of the library?
Oh, I own none now. That's one of the merits. As a matter of fact, I want to tell you that one of the questions always asked to me was people who gave lots of money to the library, but they never checked the book out of the library, because library allowed them the education in order to build their own libraries, but they never forgot the fact where they started. I started my childhood by borrowing books. A rich person like Andrew Carnegie gave it to me, and I grew up in Tabriz, Iran, when the Armenian small library allowed me to read books. And the books saved me. As a matter of fact, one of the things I feel great about it, I started in a small place borrowing books. I ended up in New York Public Library lending books. It happens. Some of our greatest benefactors were the ones who had their own big libraries, but they knew how to appreciate the book. And let me put it another way, because Jonathan and I talk when you solicit people for money for the library, don't ask them to pity, don't talk about need. You should assert themselves they're doing a civic duty. They're not doing charity. Libraries are not a charitable case. They're investments. And that's why many of the great people who helped the library believed in it, even though they had their own libraries, their own private. Some of them had never set foot in the library. They were afraid, but they came. And by coming, they saw what happened. Their faith was renewed because they acted as citizens rather than merely as philanthropists.
Dr. Gregorian, I was wondering if you would comment on the whole situation with immigration in the country and the fact, as I understand it, half of the people in New York now are immigrants.
Yes. New York should charge the rest of the nation a fee because New York is school for immigrants. And they never end. It's a perpetual school. Irish are displaced by Italians. Italians are displaced by Jews. Jews are displaced by Vietnamese or Russians. There is, in New York, just to impress you, there are over almost 280 ethnic publications in New York. There are more dailies in Chinese than in English. There's a whole subterranean culture because New York is not only cultural capital, as we claim to be arrogantly, of the nation, but it also is cultural capital of all the ethnic groups in New York. But as they come, the library is the place they establish their bridge with the old country, their old culture, while they're acculturating with America. So it's a fascinating thing as we were renovating some of the branches to see first editions of Schiller and Goethe and so forth, 1860s, 1870s in branch libraries. And now nobody was reading at that time because the next generation are Vietnamese, Cambodians, Chinese. So we had to replenish Chinese collections, right? Because we provide foundation from which you can rise to be Americanized, or American culture. As a matter of fact, this is true, by the way. I've discovered by accident in Utah. I'm told now 50% of populations, student population, public schools of Utah are immigrants. So even Salt Lake City, that is. In Providence, we have 28, 30 ethnic groups in a 26,000 or 22,000 student body. So immigration now is the biggest challenge of America. The thing that bothers me, only thing about bothers me about immigrants, that United States embassies that give visa do not notify the cities that come September you're going to have 1,000 Dominican or Cambodian or Russian families moving Providence or New York and so forth. As a result, schools don't know until September when they open the door what are they going to get. And the result is therefore turmoil for not being able to plan. But libraries serve the same role as it served in the 19th, 20th century for immigrants because they did not have the luxury of the computers and so forth. They come from a written culture to a written place in which they make transition, therefore, to the future of America. So it plays a great role for the immigrants. And also, the lunchtime I was mentioning one thing, since my wife is here, she was president of Literacy Partners of New York. Many illiterate people preferred libraries because they would not concede. Grandparents were ashamed for parents to say, I cannot read. They would say, I'm going to the library, I'll be back shortly. But they would not say, I'm going to local high school to learn English. So libraries also have been literacy centers. And my advice, whatever is worth it, for the same thing to do your library here, to have use in the evenings and so forth, local communities and others to come here to learn. It saves them face saving. That they say their parents, their wives, their spouse, I forgot my eyeglasses, would you read this letter to me? Or other things. But rather they say, I'm going to local library, I'll be back by 9 p.m. That's another venue you can do, building the library as a literacy center, because once they're used to come for learning English, they'll come for using other purposes too. So library plays a very great central role for all the immigrants. And I'm talking about millions, I'm not talking about just a couple of thousand people. Yes?
In New York, do you collect primarily in English, only in English? And could you comment on that, I mean, since you brought that subject up?
New York collects in every language. We have Chinese, we have Vietnamese, we have Cambodian, we have Russian, and the West European languages, Hindu, even Arabic now. Only thing they don't collect is Armenian to make great chagrin. They collect in every language because we have two sets of collecting in New York. Research libraries, you have to get everything, even though people don't use it. Because one day they may use it. As a matter of fact, the map, while I was saying map collection, when I first came to New York Public Library, they were collecting at the time all the telephone directories of New York for tens of years. So stupid on my part, I said, why do you have to have this old library, telephone directories? And unfortunately, I picked the wrong one. Warsaw, 1929 telephone directory. Well, you should have heard the amount of attack I got. This is not a telephone directory. It's a legal document, historical document. Most of the Jewish claims against Germany, all those Auschwitz and others, was based on 1929 telephone directory. Your business was there, your name was there. So I learned, namely research libraries have to collect because you never know when it will be necessary. Branch libraries, circulating libraries, they do two things. One is you have to judge as librarian what you want to do for the community. The other is you have to respond to the community. Community comes and say, well, I'd like to read in Russian Tolstoy's War and Peace. You can say, sorry, we don't have it in Russian. Well, to learn English, because he does not know English. But you know, once he comes, his children will be coming, so you build bridges. So we have Russian and all kinds of language. We have, I think, 60, 80, 70 languages, materials. But then the last thing is you have to renew. You cannot just rely on classics. You have to bring video, because many immigrants cannot afford video. So I remember Masterpiece Theater when I was president. I went to see MacArthur Foundation. Would they provide intellectual property rights for Masterpiece Theater to allow all the libraries of New York to have videos for Masterpiece Theater? They did. So every citizen could go, check out. Then records. You're a nice, talented kid. You want to hear the latest performance of Vladimir Horowitz in Moscow. Great triumphant return of his. But you cannot afford it. You go to Performing Arts Center, New York Public Library. You have a booth there. You check out. You can see the video if you want. If you don't want to see the video, you can play the record. All for free. You can go at the branch library, put your, if you don't have a computer, library's computer, hook up with Vatican, and see his third edition of St. Augustine's volume and so forth. Namely, you have to allow people to connect, no matter what means they choose. And we have chosen a kind of chain of being. You can start from, you can go to local branch library and hook up with New York Public Library main building, and that will hook up with Harvard libraries or Vatican libraries or Hoover Library in Stanford, all the libraries. And all of it is not free. We call it free, but somebody pays, public pays, because they have to see it as an investment. And the other one who pays, citizens pay, philanthropists pay, because they have faith that this kind of connection is not freeloading, but free investment in the future. Yes?
Could you comment on the role of and the state of libraries in the developed world?
I wish you did not ask that. It's heartbreaking. My wife and I went to India many years ago, and it was terrible to see wonderful literature, rare manuscript, being eaten away by pests, weather, so forth, because they have no means to protect it. So one of the things that was sad to me, how you preserve your cultural heritage in very bad shape. But we also went to Calcutta, known for Mother Teresa and lepers and so forth. It was the most exhilarating trip we have made. we went to a book fair. 1 million people were at the book fair. 10,000 stalls were there. 10,000. Bengalis are great readers, poets, and so forth. So there's love for book. Soviet Union, Russia, during Soviet part, the biggest gift you could take to Soviet Union was a volume by a Western writer, and so forth. Because they're reading people. 99%, 98% literate people. They love to read. Unfortunately, now I think we watch television and so forth, entertaining and so forth. But reading is the backbone of all these cultures. And they love writers. I went to a poetry festival, 2,500 people in London, ethnic and other people, hearing poets. 2,500, whole day, poet festival. So the books and reading are great. Libraries are in bad shape. And even some of them are renting books, some of them charging for books. As a matter of fact, one of the problems I have now, a moral crisis for me, we're trying to help African libraries. But some of them charge. And I said, sorry, I cannot help you because Andrew Carnegie will die in his grave twice. I say, I established free libraries and you're helping people who charge. I said, why don't we pay? How much money are you going to make by charging? $10,000? We'll pay $10,000, don't charge. But even then, they don't want to accommodate. So it's becoming this access to information and learning and books is becoming a great crisis about whether it's free, whether they can afford it or not. And that's one of the things. But libraries in many countries are in very bad shape, especially research libraries. In Calcutta, one of the two national depositories, I talked to the librarian of University of Calcutta. What do you do? He said, well, we receive books and we send them to the basement. What happens afterward? Do you catalog? No, he said. We don't want to know what's happening there. Because if you know, you're responsible for it. So we do the literal the rule. We've been received, we deposit as asked. But when you want catalog and so we don't have the money. I'll finish this by saying one story, which I did not mention. Libraries are the only institutions in the immortality business. So you have to emphasize that throughout your campaign. That's what I did with Mayor Koch. Mayor Koch had published a book. And he asked me, have you read my book? I said, no. Why not? I said, librarians don't buy books, they receive. So he sent one. So I said, have you read, have you cataloged it? No, I said, you have to wait in line. Thousands of people still have to go before you. Because I said, you may think we librarians are unimportant, but we will determine whether there will be Koch administration in history or not. All we have to do is put your papers aside. We don't have to kill it, destroy it. We put aside, wait 25, 30, 40 years, we'll catalog. We follow the library rule. So lo and behold, he increased cataloging budget. Thank you very much.
And here we thought our trust company was the only one in the immortality business. Thank you, Vartan. The institution of a library is important in so many aspects. I'm struck with the idea that hope was at the core of the successful rebuilding of the New York Public Library, that it can be fashionable. I doubt whether many here had associated the words fashionable and library so closely before. I agree with Vartan that libraries are more than buildings. They are a sanctuary and a refuge. They are a place where possibilities can be found. They are a place of hope. This is a very special message today when we are at war, a war of terrorism fought by cynical adversaries who use ignorance, intolerance, and desperation as their weapons. Libraries are about the free access and exchange of ideas. They are about understanding and they are about progress. They are about hope. There's a Greek proverb which goes, "A society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in." A library may be like one of those trees, which provides benefits which may be a generation away. In this way, our Kansas City Public Library is also like a mirror, perhaps where we as a community can reveal our interest in becoming greater, in making a difference, in offering hope. Thank you, Tom and Jan and the Community Foundation for your support of this evening's event, and more importantly, for your interest involved in this important project. Thank you to Dan Bradbury and to your leadership for the library and to the commitment to excellence, and to your staff for their work in making this project a success. Special thanks to Jen Benjamin, to Diana Ryder, and Rosie Milia for planning and coordinating tonight's activities. And thank you again, Vartan, for your insights and thoughtful remarks. And thanks to all of you for being part of this evening. Good night.